And joining us now on the debate in San Francisco, California, Richard Gage, founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And with us here in studio, Barry Zwicker, producer of The Great Conspiracy, the 9/11 News special you never saw, and author of Towers of Deception. Paul Zaremka, editor, The Hidden History of 9/11. And we welcome back Jonathan Kay, author of Among the Truthers. Okay, gentlemen, I want to start by having Richard first, and then you two gentlemen here in studio, tell me one thing, because we don't want to do the whole program on this, but tell me one thing you heard in the interview I just did with John Kay that you want to either address, set the record straight, confront, whatever. Richard, go ahead, you first.
Indeed. This individual prefers to characterize us as conspiracy theorists, but the 1,500 architects and engineers that I represent, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth at ae911truth.org, don't have any conspiracy theories. What we have is scientific forensic evidence found in the debris piles of World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 that is clear evidence of explosive demolition of all three of these buildings. And we don't have this person talking about this evidence. He just prefers to call us names. We're talking about the destruction of, for instance, of World Trade Center 7, a 47-story skyscraper that drops cleanly, suddenly, uniformly, symmetrically, at free fall acceleration straight down into its own footprint in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. Why are we not talking about that evidence, which has caused so great of concern to the hundreds of the 1,500 architects and engineers? And there's explosives found in the World Trade Center dust documented in a peer-reviewed paper. We need to be talking about this, not defending ourselves against being called having a middle-aged crisis, as Jonathan in his book refers to us as.
Okay, Richard, thank you. Paul, what one thing would you like to tackle here?
Well, the main thing that went through the whole interview, I thought, was he was doing a psychoanalysis of us. And he knows me from, an hour or two, and it's impossible to learn another human being in that short period of time. So I assert that it's absolutely impossible for him to know my psychology. As simple as that.
He's lumping you in with
truthers with a capital T. All of us are alleged to be the same. It makes absolutely no sense. For example, even, to be frank, even your introduction, when you talk about moon landing and stuff like that, I've never been interested in any of those other topics. The only serious topic where the word conspiracy applies that I've seriously investigated is 9/11, and it applies to George Bush. George Bush has a 9/11 conspiracy theory.
Can I do a fast pop quiz with you?
Yeah.
Who killed JFK?
I don't know the name of the person, but there's an excellent book, and I didn't research it myself, by Jim Douglas, which just came out within the last year or so. Okay. It shows that the level of anger against Kennedy as president by the military-industrial complex, and he also shows the evidence of who could have done it.
Is Osama bin Laden dead?
I don't really want to get into that. I mean, that's not. I haven't worked on that topic.
Barry Zwicker, what one thing do you want to deal with in the John Kay interview?
Well, one thing is that he said that we truthers, and it's true that we're all lumped together with the moon hoax people and little green people and all sorts of people who believe strange things. It's severely dehumanizing of those of us who are thoughtful and who respect evidence. He said that the hard kernel is that we distrust all authorities. That's completely untrue in my case. There's lots of authorities that I respect. We were just talking before this show about politicians. I think most of them do a darn good job. I respect them. So I really find that his demeanor in the interview is very similar to the book that you've written, John, which is really a profound, I'm going to hold back here. It's a profoundly dishonest book that consists of a farrago of vast omissions, especially omissions about any evidence about the subject ostensibly you deal with, which you then replace with nasty name-calling and innuendo and all sorts of sly put-downs of all sorts of really good people. And it actually, when I finished the book, you know, there's a way of approaching the truth many ways. And one of them is that you ask yourself, or you are asked, what's the first word that comes into your mind after you see this sculpture or whatever? And the big word that comes into my mind after reading your book is condescension on your part.
Okay, let's get a response from John. John, you want to respond to all that?
In a way, that's a fair criticism. I don't take the idea of George Bush and Dick Cheney bombing the World Trade Center seriously. And as a result, I have written a book that, by necessity, may appear condescending to those who do. My book is a serious attempt to explain why so many intelligent people, and I credit everyone on this panel with being intelligent, why they believe things that I think are plainly irrational. And by the way, I'd like to say the Wall Street Journal had a review of my book on Saturday. And one of the proudest things for me about that review was that they said that I painted a fairly affectionate portrait of conspiracy theorists and that I do not mock them. And the book was not written in a tone of mockery. And I think I was very careful about saying that the people I interviewed were intelligent. During this interview, I made a point of saying that they do not believe in moon landing stuff. Typically, their conspiracy theories are often focused on historical events.
I'm going to hold you there because I want to save time for these guys as well. Let me share the contents of an email we received today from a guy named Richard C. Lowe. He's from Boulder, Colorado, congratulating us on having this discussion tonight on the program. And he says, quote, "In 2005, I saw for the first time video of World Trade Building 7 collapsing. That moment changed my life. I know you all know," Richard, you first, "I know you all know people like Richard Lowe. Why would that be, looking at that footage, trying to understand that issue, why would that be a life-altering experience? You can speak of this, of course, Richard, because it was for you."
Yes, this building came down in the afternoon of 9/11. It is obvious that it's a controlled explosive demolition. Everybody who sees it knows that, and in fact 85% of the people we present to around the world in the 185 presentations that we've done to groups of 100 to 700, 85% of those who didn't agree with us beforehand, by a show of hands, because this is what we do, 85% of them agree with us afterwards. The reason is because the evidence is so compelling. And that's why we're so adamant that the evidence be put out there. And that's what, it's life-changing, because when people understand that Building 7 came down as a controlled demolition, it raises the question about the Twin Towers as well, for which there's a whole lot more evidence, those being a very explosive event compared to what we were told, which is the top portion driving the rest of the building down to the ground. Those buildings were destroyed in 12 seconds, hurling 9-ton perimeter wall units up to 600 feet laterally at 70 miles an hour, instant acceleration. So you see why we're talking about the evidence. There's 110 floors in each of these towers, and yet not one of those floors do we find semi-intact at all at the bottom.
Let me follow up with Barry then on this.
90,000 tons of pulverized concrete.
Let me follow up with Barry. Last time you were here on this program, we did a program about these very issues that we're talking about here. George W. Bush was still the President of the United States at the time. There is a new president. Yeah. The official story behind 9/11 has not changed, though.
No.
Does that mean that Barack Obama is now a part of the conspiracy to deny the truth about 9/11?
Short answer, I would say yes. I mean, there's continuity, as even John shows in his book. There's great continuity with governments, with cultures. And the Washington has long been a cesspool of corruption, shall we say. And the money interests, Wall Street has put a lot of money into Obama's campaigns. And I see by this morning's Globe and Mail that Mitt Romney is collecting vast amounts from Wall Street. So you have major interests, and they're not imaginary interests. They're the arms industry, they're the oil industry, they're Wall Street, and so on. These are major interests. Okay, so they have a whole lot to say about the political process. And so you have to follow the interests, follow the interests of people. I would add, by the way, just a small rider to what was just said about Building 7. Do you know that that building came down in less than the time that it takes a telephone to ring twice? Now, you don't have to be you don't even have to be an engineer to realize there's something very fishy about that.
I know we all, I shouldn't say we all, I know that my other three guests here, not John, are going to want to spend some time introducing evidence on 9/11. That really isn't what the show's about. We're trying to talk about the phenomenon and how you feel, it presents you. And to that end, Paul, are you a Marxist? Were you a Marxist?
I am.
You are. And Richard used to be a rock-ribbed Republican. But you now, because you share this belief about how 9/11 took place, I got to ask, do you now see the world the same way?
I don't share any belief with anyone about how 9/11. I mean, I don't understand when you say
well, I guess what I'm asking is, you come at things from one end of the spectrum, he from another, but you have the same kind of questions about 9/11. Do you therefore see the world the same way now?
Let me not answer that directly because I want to give you a better answer. The better answer is that because of my Marxism, I understand that the state serves the interest of the dominant class. The dominant class is the capitalist class, and that's a very broad statement, okay? So when 9/11 happened, for me it says, well, what does this say about the theory of the state? What does it say about the state? If I think that the state is serving the interest of the dominant class, so I said to myself, I don't know anything about the theory, I don't know much about the theory of the state. So 9/11 gave me the opportunity to deepen my understanding of social theory, basically.
Okay.
So I went down the road of looking at it, not from any preconceived idea that it was the government did it or anything like that, but actually in the line of my academic research. I'm a professor. I teach Marxist economic theory among other subjects. It's a normal thing for me to do as an academic.
Let me ask Richard, then, coming at it from the other way, given that I think you were a rock-ribbed patriotic Republican, was it more difficult for you because of that to confront the doubts that you had about the official version of what happened on 9/11?
It was extremely difficult. It was like I got hit over the head by a 2x4. But I have no more faith in the previous administration than I do the current one, which has continued all of its policies. They're not giving us a new investigation into the destruction of the World Trade Center either. So I don't know where my politics are anymore. I feel quite ungrounded, but quite determined to bring the truth of this evidence to the American people. That's the goal here.
John, as we listen to this conversation here, people watching us at home might think, there's nothing particularly crazy sounding about what anybody's saying. They seem like perfectly reasonable, intelligent people. What concerns you about what you're seeing here?
What concerns me is the idea that you have intelligent people, all well-educated, who are suggesting or who are receptive to the idea that teams of hundreds of CIA agents spent months boring holes into columns inside the World Trade Center, WTC 1, 2, and 7. Did this in an office building that has, 50, 60, 70,000 people there every day. Brought in tons of explosives, then murdered thousands of people, all done in secret, with no one realizing this for 10 years, all as a pretext to attack Afghanistan and Iraq, despite the fact that they then alleged that 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. So this complete fantasy, and that is being taken seriously by not only the intelligent people on this panel, but millions of intelligent Americans and Canadians. It disturbs me that so many people inhabit a world of fantasy.
Barry, are you inhabiting a world of fantasy?
You're just stating as bald assertion.
That was not uncharitable, the way I described it, by the way.
I didn't say it was.
Okay, good.
You're just stating as bald assertion that it's inconceivable that those things that you described, and I don't subscribe to all of them, or things like that could have happened. That's just your bald assertion. In your book, you spend 3/4 of one page, that's page 20, under the heading caveats. This book is not intended as a rebuttal to conspiracists. In other words, you're saying, I'm not going to deal with evidence in this book.
That book has been written in 2005 by Popular Mechanics, as you know.
Yeah, and you cite Popular Mechanics as one of the references that we should turn to and find out. Do you realize there have been whole books written? I read the book by the Popular Mechanics people. There have been whole books written just showing how shoddy and dishonest that was. Very much like your shoddy, dishonest book. I'm sorry to say, this really, in a way it's not personal, but in a way it is. Because you actually lied about me personally. You lied about when I came, when you... Oh yes, well, we'll get into that if you want.
Can we clarify this? What's the lie?
Okay, the lie is that John says in his book, and you can say it's a small thing, but well, one thing he says is that we lack a sense of humor, that the totalitarian mindset.
The clock is running, Barry,
yeah,
so let me get you to...
So anybody who knows me knows I do not lack a sense of humor. That's a real put down. However, you said that when you came to my house to interview me, that then I announced that I would interview you. John, before we ever met, I said to you over the phone, hey, I always go for interviews, but you know what? In this case, I'd like to interview you too. In other words, we'll have a conversation. And you said, sure. And then in your book, you say that I have a chess clock. I don't own a chess clock, John. No, let me finish.
You did have a clock, and you did keep
yeah,
exact
and you know
track
why,
of how much
and you
you
know
were
why
talking
it was,
about.
and anybody who knows me, because this is
what's the lie?
This does hit personal.
What's the lie?
Well, the lie is that I announced to him after he arrived that I would be interviewing him, and that's not true. We talked about that over the phone. And then, as far as the clock is concerned, you know how much I talk, Steve. I'm well known to everybody as being very voluble, and I actually wanted to keep track of my time so I didn't talk too much and have a chance to hear him.
Can you respond to that, and then we're going to move on, please?
I regret any implication if that was, I don't think it came across as disparaging. In fact, I thought that, as I said, my profile of you was rather affectionate, and you did time us as we spoke. I did not suggest in the book that you blindsided me in any way. I discussed our meeting as amicable, which I think it was.
Okay, let me go on.
Moving on. Me being a crank.
Moving on. Michael Smith, Chapter 3, graphics, please. Can we get these up? Here are some numbers I want to share with you guys, and then we'll get some responses on that. On the issue of whom to believe, 36% of Americans in the year 2006 agreed that it is very or somewhat likely that the U.S. government allowed the 9/11 attacks to proceed. Next graphic. In 2007, that number drops to 26%. Next graph. In 2009, it drops to 22%. Next one. 2010, 15% believed the collapse of World Trade Center towers was a result of controlled demolition, as we've talked about here. 6% believed the images of planes crashing into the World Trade Center towers were altered. So, Paul, let's go to you on this. The numbers are getting smaller. There are, it appears to be anyway, fewer people who believe. There are fewer people who disbelieve the official story around 9/11. You've had a chance to make your case. Are the people not buying?
Actually, it's hard for me to answer that because I never saw those numbers before. I don't know the interview questions. The questions may have been changed from one period to the next.
I take nothing at face value, right?
Well, I'm
okay, Richard, go ahead.
That, Steve.
Go ahead, Richard.
I'm being I have requests for interviews almost every day now. This didn't used to happen. So the popularity of the technical evidence for the explosive demolition of all 3 World Trade Center towers is increasing demand. I can't, and I'm traveling to Atlanta next week and throughout Europe in June. There is quite a demand, and in September we're in Toronto, Ottawa, and New York. It is an extraordinary uplift for us at ae911truth.org. So I encourage people to check the evidence on the website, and you'll find out why it's growing by millions every year, the 9/11 Truth movement.
Barry, do you think that, if you did a survey, you'd probably find 6% of people don't believe that the moon landing actually happened. Have those 6% gone too far?
I don't know anything really about moon landing beliefs or not. And that's one of the problems I have with John's book. He lumps
You're
together.
all lumped in together.
Yeah, it's quite unfair. It's guilt by association and so on.
Okay, then let me try this then. Let me throw a let's do this clip. David Icke, the English conspiracy theorist. Michael, you want to run this one? Middle of page 3. Roll tape, please.
When you first hear that line, few people control the world, it seems crazy. But you know the sad thing? Not only is it possible, if you control certain institutions and certain flows of information, it's a piece of cake. You can't control billions of people physically to put people like George W. Bush and Bill Clinton into power. The way the scam is played, and always has been played, is to manipulate the way we think and feel so we perceive the world and therefore behave in ways that the agenda wants us to.
Not this agenda, for what it's worth, just to clarify the other. Barry, do you agree that those people who vote for mainstream politicians and do not agree with you about 9/11 have somehow had our thoughts manipulated?
Well, look, human beings, we are manipulable, if you will. I mean, reality is a very hard thing to pin down in our personal lives or otherwise. And the mainstream media set the agenda. And again, I use the agenda deliberately here as a reference point. The mainstream media set the agenda. So most people get their information on most subjects, most of the time, from the likes of the National Post and CBC and so on, and to some extent here, which is one of the marvelous oases, in my opinion, in the media landscape. So that, of course, when the media, which is demonstrably the case, I mean, I've been doing media criticism since 1970, and I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of television segments, television shows, books, and articles, and the mainstream media are really very much opposed to investigating, showing any curiosity about these kinds of facts that our friend Richard Gage has brought out today.
Paul, in which case, how have you managed to see through this vast manipulation? Why do you laugh every time I ask you a question?
No, because seriously, your questions are hard questions. I gave a hint before that I try to do my research seriously, okay? And this came out as a serious topic. So I'm very used to sort of being critical. That's not a negative word. That's a scientific word. That's what scientists do. They think about things.
But this is a genuine question. There is, if you believe that mass media intend to manipulate the public for whatever ill reasons.
I don't think, actually, well, from my point of view, okay, the media is controlled mostly by corporations. It's not the media that's controlling, okay? It's the corporations, that are, I mean, there's billions and billions of dollars that are being earned on this war in the Middle East. There's billions of dollars being earned over the reconstruction of just the World Trade Centers. I mean, we're talking big money. People are making, and there's a lot of people out there that don't care at all who gets in the way of them earning money.
But Jonathan, help us understand then how, if organizations like the National Post are representing corporate interests that are manipulating people to believe a certain agenda, using that term advisedly, how have these folks managed to avoid being manipulated? You've studied them. What do you think?
Well, again, I don't want to be accused of being condescending, but many of the conspiracy theorists I've interviewed, as I said, are highly intelligent people who come from fields, demanding technical fields, in which they have spent their lives piecing together little bits of data. For instance, Barry, who was an investigative journalist. Paul, you're a scholar. I've interviewed others who were former theologians and some who are amateur inventors. These are mostly men who spend their lives trying to piece together data through their professions. And late in their career, they're looking for another intellectual exercise. And I know this will appear condescending. And conspiracism fits the bill because it allows them to apply their considerable brain power to what is essentially a giant puzzle. A puzzle of 9/11 or the puzzle of Barack Obama's identity. Well, it tends to be, as I say, men at a certain stage in life who are looking for an intellectual puzzle.
Richard,
and this applies.
Does that describe you, Richard? Richard in San Francisco, does that describe you? Why are we having, oh, it looks like we've lost our line to San Francisco for a second there. All right, we'll try and relatch and we'll pick that up. Does that describe you, Barry?
I don't like Jonathan Kay defining and describing me. I don't fit almost any of your stereotypes about a conspiracist. And by the way, besides you're not looking at evidence in your book, and you constantly don't look at evidence in your columns or in person or anything, and then you replace that with name calling, and it's very sly.
I don't think I called you a name.
Well, a crank.
Actually, crank is a term of endearment.
Sure.
I talk about cranks. I talk about Ignatius Donnelly and many famous cranks throughout American history who were elected politicians who used their intellect and their truth-seeking to gain fame. And it's not meant as a term of abuse.
Well, in the context of your book, it comes out as a term of abuse.
Can I ask you this, Barry? And I don't mean this facetiously at all, but there will be people watching us right now noting that the satellite to one of our guests to San Francisco has gone down, and they will be asking, wonder if TVO had this guy on for 10 or 15 minutes, decided they didn't like what he had to say, and so pulled the plug on him.
I really doubt that. It was already announced, well, I forget whether the cameras were rolling, that there's a certain amount of time on the bird there. And so you had 38 minutes, and maybe it ran out.
Did I follow up on this crank issue?
The director has just told me in my ear the time ran out early. That's a fact, but there will be those who will think that somehow we've colluded to prevent him from speaking.
Get them in here and let them speak for themselves, because that's not me.
Okay, Paul, what did you want to say?
No, I just want to say, he said, I mean, he defines three of us as a crank. You do. You said explicitly on page 190. Barry, myself, who, by the way, we have a lot of differences among ourselves,
Yeah.
and David Ray Griffin, okay? But then on page 149, you say, there are 3 infallible signs of a crank. That oddball, goofball sort of person who mutters, walks along about how he's grasped the key to everything. I mean, that doesn't define me
answer
at
that,
all.
John. You know, come on.
Okay, let him do it.
This is an intellectual exercise that a lot of men do. People are looking for all explanatory theories. Religion supplies
Not
that.
an intellectual exercise.
Wait a second. Religion supplies it for some people. Radical partisan politics supplies it for some people. This is why Ayn Rand is so popular, because her books purport to give an all-powerful explanation for how economies work and how people should define their goals in life. Conspiracism falls into that pattern. It gives people an intellectual purpose in life. It makes them feel like prophets, showing people the truth about how the world really works.
You've got some real ones in front of you, John, and we don't fit that bill. I'm sorry. And another thing, you said that we seem strangely disconnected from all this, as if it's just a debating exercise.
Yes.
And anybody who knows me couldn't possibly believe that. I really resent being defined by somebody in a down-putting way. And that's what you do in your book to lots of people. You know, your book, and your book is really supremely dishonest. It really is. And you wrap this.
Sounds like you disagree with it. I don't know that
yeah,
it's
well,
dishonest. I don't know that it's dishonest.
I'm still
Okay,
holding back. The thing is, the reason I say dishonest is because there are places where you were dishonest about me personally, and in larger case, saying a crank, no sense of humor, and that kind of stuff. So I personally know that there are dishonest parts of your book because I can see it.
Let
and
me try
I can
this.
feel it.
Let me try this. Paul.
Positive?
Yes, Paul, go ahead.
I want to say something positive about your book, because actually I kind of liked your book. The reason why I did, first of all, I learned about...
Can I get a blurb for the back cover of the next edition?
I mean, I liked it in a certain sense. And the sense in which I liked it is I learned a lot about the people who you say are in the conspiracy movement, things I didn't know about them before, okay? And also, I've just been through an election in a union, and one of the things I learned about it is to do a better job is to also understand the people who oppose you. And you've helped me by how you write this to understand better the people who object to my thoughts about 9/11. You know, and that helps me out, frankly.
Can I follow up on one angle here, which is you've pointed out a couple of times that it is almost always men who are leading these movements. Why is that?
Well, part of it is just the sociology of the 9/11 truth movements and other conspiracist movements, as I define it. A lot of time is spent web surfing, on the internet. It tends to be fairly asocial. There are conferences, but a lot of it is done by men spending 12 to 14, 16-hour days in front of a computer screen, gathering disconnected bits of information from all sorts of esoteric reports.
Women don't like to do that?
Strangely enough, no. For reasons that probably go beyond the scope of the show, there is a certain highly monomaniacal, highly focused aspect to conspiracism.
Monomaniacal. You know, now he's really just throwing this stuff around all the time. It's quite dehumanizing and quite demeaning.
Would you agree, though, that most of the, I mean, it's certainly in my experience, most of the people I've seen in the 9/11 truther movement are all male?
I think that's just a statistical fact. There's some marvelous, marvelous females, but that happens to be the case.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Does it help speak to one of the points he's trying to make? That
no,
there's
his
something...
points just fall all on their own.
So I should say that most great chess grandmasters are men too. There is something about highly abstract, logical puzzles in a dehumanized context that, for good and bad reasons, seems to appeal to the male mind.
The suggestion, Paul, is there's something going on in your brain that doesn't happen in a woman's brain.
I don't want to get into this, the science of gender differences. This is not the purpose of the show.
Okay, let's try this then. Let's try this. I'm on the top of page 4, Michael, and this is one paragraph from a very lengthy email we received from a retired pilot who was on one of the last planes to fly out of LaGuardia Airport in New York on September 10th, 2001. Here's what he had to say. At the very least, an open investigation of the events of 9/11 should be done in hopes of setting the world on a path of truth and justice and hopefully peace. With all that has gone on in this world, you have to wonder, when will sanity prevail and name-calling stopped, and just the facts are brought to bear, leading us to the truth wherever it may lead us. I, for one, want to stand down the rhetoric and prevent tyranny from settling in on our once free land, and the only way to do that is in the light of reason and the light of truth. Then good women and men will prevail and peace may return. The suggestion here, Paul, is that, I guess the suggestion is, I don't want to speak for him, but what I inferred from this is that if we could only get past the 9/11, the real story behind 9/11, we'd sort of have truth and justice in the world today. What do you think of that observation?
Well, see, the problem is that I want to make a couple points about the 9/11 issue that haven't been
Could you
mentioned.
speak to the question I just asked?
Well, it's coming to it, okay? That the government has security cameras in many of the places which were like for the Pentagon. They had security cameras. They took them all away, so you have no evidence of what actually happened that day. And then they have the population fighting over what happened at the Pentagon, okay? All they have to do is release the videos, and your problems are answered.
But that's not responsive to the question I asked.
It is, because the government is creating the conditions where people people are fighting among each other over something that they could lower the rhetoric by just showing the evidence.
Barry, take a kick at it if you would.
I really liked what that ex-pilot said. And you notice that he mentioned we need reason, he mentioned evidence, and he said we have to reduce name calling. That brings very much into focus John's book. Virtually no evidence, no serious attempt to look at the evidence.
You have made that point.
Oh yeah,
but could you speak to the point the pilot's trying to make,
well,
which is that if we could get to the quote-unquote the real story, we'd have truth and justice in the world today?
Well, it could go a long way because you cannot have peace without justice, and you cannot have truth. You cannot have justice without truth.
So he may be right.
Truth is the first thing. In all things. And for Jonathan to say that he wants us to return to rational discourse and reason when he provides no evidence in his book, and when he replaces it with name calling, it's like appointing an arsonist to the fire department. If the future of reasonable discourse lies in the hands of the likes of Jonathan Kay, then we're doomed, because his book absolutely is an advertisement for anti-reason, anti-evidence, name-calling, and dehumanization.
The more you go at him, the more copies he's going to sell.
But I'm still holding back, though.
Okay, you're still holding back. How about you? Could you speak to what the ex-pilot has to say here?
In terms of trust, this idea of moving toward that values trust. I have trust. I have trust in the 9/11 Commission report. I have trust in the public servants who staffed the investigation of 9/11. I have trust in Barack Obama's birth certificate. I have trust in public institutions. I'm not completely trusting. I'm a journalist. It's my job to inquire. But if you completely get rid of all the trust and question everything, even the idea that the government would destroy the World Trade Center for the purposes of warmongering, you lead to a sort of nihilistic society, where you don't get to the truth, you don't get to trust. Instead, you get into a sort of chattering classes of conspiracy theorists who have no shared sense of reality.
But I guess the problem is that once, Gulf of Tonkin resolution in the 1960s, there have been times where the government has blatantly lied about stuff and led us into war, and can you blame people for saying history could repeat?
On this, I will give Barry Zwicker credit. Barry Zwicker has a great guide to false flag operations in history, which I've read. And it is completely true, as Barry says, that there are plenty of instances where false flag operations have been conducted. In fact, I think Barry Zwicker goes back to the Trojan Wars and to the Trojan Horse, and goes through history. The Reichstag fire. People talk about the Gulf of Tonkin, though that's contested. They talk about Operation Northwoods in the early 60s. There are limited instances of false flag operations. It doesn't mean that the government we have today is lying to us about everything, including momentous crimes against humanity.
Paul.
I want to make a comment about that. You said that the 9/11 Commission report is kind of your Bible about 9/11, okay? I mean, you said it was, you trust it, okay?
I see it as the most authoritative report on 9/11.
Okay,
yes.
Now tell me why, I'm going to ask two questions. Why didn't it deal with the World Trade Center 7 at all? It just didn't even mention it. And secondly, and this actually gets me more angry than, I know Richard Gage likes the other issue more. The issue that gets me the most anger is when you go down the list of the 19 hijackers, there's not one even attempt to show that any of those people were the actual people on the plane. There's not even an attempt.
And let me just say, we're got a minute and a half to go, so do your best, John.
Look, I know that the 9/11 Truth community has problems with the 9/11 Commission report. In terms of WTC 7, you don't have to go to the 9/11 Commission report. You could go to the NIST report that was put out, I believe, in 2007. The NIST report was a complete state-of-the-art technical report done by hundreds of engineers, probably the most advanced finite element method computer simulation done in the history of engineering to show why WTC-7 fell. But most of the conspiracy theorists I meet have absolutely no desire to read reports like that, or if they do, they discredit them because they're from the government. And as I say, this nihilistic distrust of government doesn't get you to the truth. It just gets you to chasing down rabbit holes.
Answer the issue about the hijackers, because that was the one that burns me even more.
I mean, that is something that was settled within, I know you'll probably take this as incriminating, but it was settled within weeks of the crime. And the New York Times had their names
said
within
that we cannot prove those people. It could be changing passports or lots of things.
Well, as you know, the government of Saudi Arabia denied access to the family members of many of the hijackers.
There was 9 or 10 people who claimed that they were alive afterwards when you had a lot of information out there about them. I mean, this is serious business of identifying and then starting wars over the issue that those people who were identified as responsible, in fact, were responsible.
And sadly, I've got to jump in and bring an end to the serious business because our clock has expired. I do apologize to Richard Gage. I guess I was going to say, trust me, we didn't pull the plug on him. We invited him to be here. We wanted him to be here. We ran out of satellite time to California. But I do want to thank Barry Zwicker and Paul Zaremba, authors respectively of Towers of Deception and The Hidden History of 9/11, for appearing on the program tonight, and Jonathan Kay. Among the Truthers is John's latest book. He may not get a blurb from Barry or Paul, but I read it and found it fascinating. Thanks, everybody.